It's been clear since its unveiling nearly 2 years ago that God of War represents a new direction for the series, and this past week we finally had an opportunity to see more of the game in action. Right away, it's clear that what's on display here is extremely promising, and God of War should comfortably stand alongside the likes of Uncharted 4 and Horizon Zero Dawn when it comes to presentation. Today then, I want to take this opportunity to examine this brand new capture of the game in action, to get a better idea of what we can expect when it launches in April. To begin with, all the footage featured in this video was captured on a PlayStation 4 Pro, and as this is a 4K video, it's now possible to determine the resolution on display here. So, like Horizon, our initial results suggest that God of War is using a form of checkerboard rendering to reach a native 4K pixel count. There's numerous ways to implement checkerboard rendering, of course, and the overall image here is sharper than Horizon, with some occasional checkerboard artifacts popping up from time to time. Overall though, the results are very convincing. I had to spend a few minutes looking closely at various still shots before calling it, which suggests that the development team has been very successful in delivering a sharp presentation. This is shaping up to be one of the cleanest games available on the platform.
It's Skull and Hati, the giant wolves who chase the sun and moon.
Now, if we look beyond the basic rendering resolution, however, there is a lot to appreciate here, and this should come as no surprise. After all, Sony Santa Monica is well known for its graphical prowess. While the original games were certainly impressive on PlayStation 2, it's the two sequels on PlayStation 3 that stand out in terms of visual quality and remain among the best looking games released on last generation consoles. With God of War 2018, that trend continues. This is the first time we've seen the series properly represented on current generation hardware, and it shines. The first element which stands out is the quality of individual assets. Kratos himself is extremely detailed and beautifully shaded this time, with lots of fine detail featured across his clothing and accessories. The various other characters of the good and bad variety are similarly detailed and consistent in quality throughout the demonstration. The same can be said of the world itself. The texture detail on display is first rate across the board. The quality of these rock textures, for instance, really stands out, as do the smaller details scattered around every scene. Now, it's nothing groundbreaking, mind you, but it does show a level of quality typically reserved for these high-end first-party releases. Another fantastic visual feature on display are the particles. Using what appears to be GPU-accelerated particles, God of War features tastefully done pyrotechnics throughout the video. Early in the system's life, games like infamous Second Son blew us away with its particle effects, but most developers show more restraint in using them, and it kind of feels like an effect that's disappeared somewhat. It's nice then to see Sony Santa Monica leaning into these effects in a big way, as its style fits a lot of the action on display here. There's loads of physics interactions on screen as well this time. Cloth flows naturally as Kratos attacks his foes, and objects break apart in your wake. Granted, these objects disappear just as quickly, but it's still well implemented and almost recalls the days of rolling through barrels in Dark Souls. Then we have the volumetric lighting. God of War leans heavily on volumetric effects to help build atmosphere. Dense fog and piercing shafts of light can be seen throughout much of the demo video. Now, we're not quite sure what kind of implementation we're looking at here, mind you, but it's truly volumetric rather than a simple screen space solution used for direct light shafts in many other games. The way it interacts with things like the ground fog is also notable here. Then there's the shadows, which are cleanly rendered with excellent filtering and a smooth cascade, though the actual resolution of the shadow maps seem to be on the more moderate side. Post-processing is also of excellent quality here, with robust per-object motion blur used throughout. This helps accentuate individual attacks, lending more weight to each motion. High-quality motion blur has been a staple of the series since God of War 3, and it's great to see this trend continue. And yes, people in the comments, I'm once again praising motion blur, as I will always do. It's the key to achieving realistic visuals in motion, and it looks absolutely awesome here. One other thing worth checking out then in this footage is the user interface. This is the first time we've been able to check out the game's menu system. Compared to the slightly chaotic design of the previous games, this new title feels more constrained and smartly designed with clean lines and sharp text throughout. That said, I'm a little concerned about the appearance of any crafting mechanics, but we'll have to see how that plays out. The only visual element in the game thus far that I've seen that doesn't quite match the rest of the presentation are the reflections. You can see what I mean here in the water surface in this particular area. It looks good enough, but it doesn't seem to fully reflect all of the surroundings. It's surprising, especially when you consider how robust some of the reflections both on water or otherwise in the previous game were. For a PS3 game, this particular scene still manages to look amazing, I think. The overall impression here is that the world itself is extremely cohesive, with visual elements working together to create something natural yet fantastical. There's clear evidence that we're looking at a full PBR workflow here, for instance, as materials do appear highly realistic, but it's also likely that the art itself has been modified somewhat to fit the more stylistic approach embraced by the team. It's kind of reminiscent of the recent Shadow of the Colossus remake we looked at in that sense, and it works really well here. Now at this point you might remember that one of the greatest changes the developers have made this time around is the camera system. The basic idea that the team has presented to us is that it will never cut. Cutscenes and action flow seamlessly throughout the game with no loading screens or bespoke angles. Now obviously I'm cutting around rather often in this video, but the idea is fascinating and this represents the opposite of what was delivered in previous games. For one thing, there's the scope of the world to consider. Just how large is this game now? It would be neat to see a large interconnected world similar to something like Bloodborne, but it's not yet clear how it will all come together in the end. One thing is certainly clear though, the game will play out very differently than previous games in the series, both in terms of level design and camera work. You look back at God of War Ascension for instance, and the camera is constantly shifting around. It works on a predefined route designed to provide a cinematic angle of the action at all times. This does allow for some pretty epic battles as the camera moves in and out and around the player in real time. The jump to a tighter third-person camera is interesting then, as it suggests that these large-scale battle scenes, if they're included at all, will need to play out rather differently than before. In that sense, this kind of feels like the developers have constrained themselves to an interesting effect. And perhaps that's exactly what the series has needed. The previous two titles raised the bar so high in terms of large-scale battles that it almost feels impossible to top. Thankfully, the changes made to the core combat loop do seem to have a significant impact on the weight of the attacks. I always felt that these previous games did a somewhat poor job with connecting player attacks with individual enemies. It almost feels as if you're just swinging the blades of Olympus through your enemies until they die rather than directly hitting them. The new game then seems to do a much better job with this. By restricting Kratos to more realistic weapons, the animators and combat designers have managed to create something that offers a stronger visual impact with each hit. Beyond that, in those previous games again, it always kind of feels like Kratos is fighting large crowds, but this time, it feels like each enemy is more dangerous than before, which could lead to some more interesting fights. So perhaps my initial impressions 2 years ago were somewhat close to reality, that this is a pairing of God of War with the more focused, thoughtful combat of something like Nioh or Dark Souls. It'll be fascinating to see how this plays out over the course of the game when it releases. Then there's the QTEs. In the new game, there's still context-sensitive button presses, it seems, but it seems to work in a very different way than the previous games. All of the original God of War games relied very heavily on specific QTE button prompts that would pop up at specific points in the battle. In most cases, after doing enough damage to each boss, you'll have to perform a few button presses based on specific button prompts that pop up on screen during gameplay. Based on what we've seen in God of War 2018, however, there doesn't appear to be anything quite like this in the new game at all. Even things like opening treasure chests, which used to rely on mashing buttons rapidly, function more like you'd expect in the new game. And really, this is all probably for the better in the end, but it just shows how much the game is changing in terms of the core design compared to the originals. Ultimately, this is just a taste of what's in store for us in the final game, which is set to launch in April. It's been a long road for Sony Santa Monica, but every indication at this point suggests that this will be an excellent game. But to find out for sure, we're going to have to wait until it launches. Which brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this little preview, be sure to let us know by liking, subscribing, and following us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.